Hey everyone, welcome to Mystifying Miracles. Today I'm going over a story about two brothers who go out on a fishing trip and things don't go quite as planned. So stay tuned and I'm going to get into it. All right, so our story today begins at dawn, and there was a heavy fog that was just breaking out over Chesapeake Bay. And there were two brothers by the name of David and Jim Boyd. They were getting ready to go on a fishing trip. However, unexpected weather was now a threat to their plans. They almost thought about canceling, but then they were like, they decided against it. They thought, no, we can do this. And it's worth noting that both men were trained in blind navigation, and also both men were licensed sea captains. So because of that, they thought fog should not deter this trip. In addition, the brothers had been planning this fishing trip for quite some time, and they had been really excited about it as they never got to do this. It wasn't something they often got to do. They get to the marina and they're all excited. They've got their gear, they're getting their boat ready, and then that's when it dawns on them and they're like, oh my goodness, how could we have made this mistake? It was December 31st, so because of the holiday, all the bait shops were closed. But no biggie, they didn't get to get the bait they wanted, which was clams, but instead they just pulled some frozen crab out of their freezers and used that as bait instead. They were determined for this trip. Well, as the boat's going in the water, the fog's getting more and more thick. It's so dense. And visibility, it was down to 30 feet. Good thing there were buoys in the water, so the brothers were using this as markers to know how to navigate. Because you couldn't see in front of you hardly. Well, as they're nearing one of these buoys, David, he takes his hand off of the tiller because he wants to look at his map and kind of get their bearings of where they're going, where they're at, etc. But when he took the hand off, suddenly the boat begins to spin and veer off course, like on its own. So David had to quickly grab the tiller again and try to steer it back. And he thought, well, that was weird. Also, when David grabbed the tiller once the boat swung, he was certain that it had done a 360 and that they were back in the direction that they're, initially heading to. But that wasn't the case. But he didn't know that at this time. And as he's looking at his map, his brother Jim is just staring intensely at this one direction in front of him into that dense fog. And, David kind of makes a joke like, what are you trying to look at in this pea soup? Referencing to how thick it was. What could you even be looking at? But Jim kept looking. He was intently looking. And it was just on the edge of, visibility where he sees two men hanging on to a buoy. So his eyes pop open wide and he told his brother, he's like, oh my gosh, there's two men over there. Now, David, right off the bat at first, he thought, oh my goodness, my brother's seeing things. But Jim begins to point and David begins intently looking. And sure enough, two men were slumped over in the distance over on a buoy. Now, it was later after this day took place when they put the stories together and they found out what happened. So now I'm going to get into the story of the two men that were on the buoy. There was a man by the name of Ben Matthews, and he was in town. He lived out of state, but he had come in town to visit his buddy Sam Hansen, and they wanted to get in a quick little fishing trip before Ben had to leave. Well, it was December 31st when they rented a small boat to go on this little fishing trip. The boat, it was great. It had a small motor and it was, good for what they needed. However, these two guys were not experienced, and they didn't know that the boat, it didn't come with two of the things that you absolutely needed: a compass and a radio. And, when they set out that morning, it wasn't foggy yet, or, the fog was not that dense. But as they're out on the water, that's when that heavy fog started moving in, and before the men knew it, they couldn't see which way to go, where to turn, or anything. So Ben and Sam, they said they went in circles and they just tried and tried to get somewhere where they could see or get help, but they couldn't. The boat is now low on fuel. However, also the men saw that a buoy was nearby, and that kind of was like a relief to them, they said, because it was like, oh, a buoy, that means a shipping channel is near. And where there's a shipping channel, there are boats that will come in and out, so they'll be able to get some help. So they pull up to the buoy, they tie their boat to it, and Ben wants to climb up the buoy to get a better look, a better vantage point. So he does that. Sam wants to also help. He scrambles up the buoy as well to have two sets of eyes looking out for a ship. And so they're doing this for a while. Thus far, there was no sign of any rescue. All night, they tossed back and forth on that buoy, and not a boat was in sight. There was a few times they said they thought they saw a pilot boat, but it was never close enough or, for them to see or scream out, really. So not sure if that was a thing or just their imagination, being hopeful, but there was nobody there to help them. These men were getting desperate. They were cold. They were tired. And so they decided to light a small fire because that's how cold they were, being on this buoy and in the water all night. So they go down into the boat and they decide to light up the tackle box and the life jackets because that's really all there was to light up. So they set a small fire, and they said the fumes, they were so toxic to breathe that in. It was hard to breathe, but at least they had some warmth for a short time. It was about dawn where they were feeling exhausted. They were weary, they were tired, and then they hear this sound. They said it was like a deafening, quick sound, and it turned out it was the line that was securing the rowboat to the buoy, and it had snapped. So now the two men that are clinging to this buoy have been all night. They're watching their boat just float off in the water in the distance. And now they said isolation was setting in, the desperate feeling of we are going to die here. In addition, Ben had diabetes, so this whole ordeal in the elements, it was beginning to take a toll on his body. 4 more painstakingly long hours go by, and the men are just, each hour goes by, the more hopeless the situation feels. Both men now barely had strength to hang on to this buoy any longer. So Ben cries out to God. He begins to pray, please, Lord, send us help. Their worst fear was falling into the sea and drowning, drifting off into nowhere land, and their families never knowing, oh my gosh, what happened. That's when, in an instant, right after Ben prays, they see a boat in the distance, just barely, and it was getting closer. It was heading straight for them. The two men said their spirits soared within them, and a jolt of energy just came within them all of a sudden. They were so excited. And after that, the story unfortunately didn't go into more details of what happened when the two brothers got up to these two men and helped them and what happened. Did they go to the hospital? That was not included in the story, unfortunately. But I'm assuming they did. They were obviously rescued by the two brothers, so things ended up being okay. I just don't have any details on that exact ending. However, David and Jim, the brothers, they absolutely 100% believe that God knows the situations of men. And they are absolutely certain as well that it was God who spun their boat around that day. Remember, at the beginning of the story, they didn't do it. He just put his hand off the tiller and all of a sudden it spun on its own. So they know that that was a God thing. And thank goodness that, they were so avid about their fishing trip as well, because had they canceled it, for the weather or the holiday, would those men have been found? I mean, they could barely hang on to that buoy any longer. So obviously, definitely a miracle. The two brothers definitely say it's a miracle. The two men that were saved know it's a miracle. And yeah, just divine intervention. Just a lovely story. I want to know what you guys think. I appreciate you watching and your support. It really means a lot. So welcome to all the new subscribers, and glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it put a smile on your face, and I'm going to see you guys next time.